Hi everyone, my name is Eric Schurter and I'm the product manager for the Static Site Editor group, which is part of the create stage of the DevOps lifecycle here at GitLab. I want to talk to you today a little bit about what we have planned for the 13.6 milestone, and the full list of what we will be working on in 13.6 is in this issue, which I'll link in the description of the video. Feel free to click through and open up these issues to get more detail, read all the details on the proposal, as well as provide any feedback or ask any questions. I'd love to hear from you in those issues. I do want to highlight just a few of them, though, in this kickoff, and the first of which is something I've highlighted in a few kickoffs before, but we're looking to deliver in 13.6 the ability to upload an image using the static site editor. So this means that as you're editing content, you can click a button, upload an image from your computer. It will be inserted into the content, and then the asset itself included in the merge request that gets created when you're done editing. Now, we were working on this before, and we had to pause because we uncovered the requirement for a configuration file in the static site editor. There was no universal place where we can be sure that we wanted to store this asset, and we didn't want to have to make users choose every time they uploaded an image which directory they wanted to store it. So in 13.4 and 13.5, we have been doing exactly that. We've introduced a configuration file for the static site editor, and we've been adding values into that configuration file, support for values, and including the one for the image upload path. So in 13.6, we'll be picking up the work again to upload an image, as well as delivering the ability to customize that destination path in the configuration file so the static site editor knows where to put the resulting asset. And the next one I want to highlight is an iteration on a feature that we shipped in 13.5. So I'll give you a little demo of that. Prior to 13.5, when you click to submit changes from the static site editor, it would use a default merge request template and description that didn't provide much context to the change. And if you wanted to follow best practices and be a good citizen for your engineers and provide more information, you'd have to edit it on the merge request page. And the friction in that experience was a frequent point of feedback in our early tests. So now in 13.5, when you submit changes, you can add a title and a brief description to your merge requests. Now in 13.6, we want to extend this even further and pre-populate this description text field with the default merge request template if there is one assigned to the project. And if there are multiple merge request templates, we want to be able to expose the select box so that users can switch between merge request templates within that same view. That way, when you submit your merge request, it's in a much more consistent, much more informative manner, and you can provide the context necessary for review without having to edit your merge request afterwards. And speaking of feedback, the other major point of feedback we got from our initial rollout to the GitLab handbook was that the resulting merge requests can be rather noisy and make it difficult to look at the file diffs, because the content that goes into the static site editor in Markdown may be rather loose in its interpretation of Markdown syntax. There are multiple ways to do lots of different things in Markdown. Markdown parsers can be fairly forgiving about spacing, indentation, line breaks, and things like that, and still render out perfectly legitimate and valid HTML. However, when the WYSIWYG editor writes that back out to Markdown, it needs to adhere to a very strict Markdown syntax, a set of rules that are defined in the editor itself. So when you pass loose content into the static site editor and then export a very strict Markdown syntax, then what you end up with is a whole bunch of formatting changes to the file that kind of obscure the user's changes in the diff view. And sometimes if the diff's large enough, make it so that our merge request diff view is actually unusable. So we may not have a solution for this in 13.6, but I want to bring it up because it'll be a research and development effort in 13.6. We're going to be defining an MVC. One idea we've had is to take that first initial reformatting of the Markdown and just pre-commit that as a single commit. And then any subsequent changes from the user are additional commits. So at least then they can be isolated and reviewed separately in the merge request. Ideally, we want to get to a point where we can respect the formatting of the page and only reformat content that's actually being edited, or potentially surface the ability for users to manually reformat if they want to and sort of clean up their project. Those would require a bit more work, and that actually leads me to the next issue that I want to talk about. But we'll be looking at trying to bring something into 13.6 that we can at least make this experience a little bit better for our handbook users, and look towards implementing a more holistic change as part of our re-architecture. And so the re-architecture is a project we've been working on for a few months now, and we've been sort of questioning whether our current architecture is sufficient to take us into the next phase of our product's maturity, our features maturity. And the gist of it is the research has indicated that no, we need something a little more flexible, a little more extensible, and that has had us evaluating alternative editors and working on a new architecture. There'll be more on that later, and there's lots of videos on our static site editor playlist where we've been discussing this architecture if you're interested. But the gist of it is that we will be replacing our all-in-one editor, which is based on Toast UI, with a combination of a new HTML WYSIWYG editor, a different Markdown parser, and using Editor Lite for our source code editing. Now, there's no way this is getting done in 13.6, but we'll be circulating the final proposal for which frameworks and which products we want to use in this architecture, as well as looking for feedback internally from other groups that might benefit from using the WYSIWYG editor as a GitLab UI component. So that's what we'll be working on in 13.6, and then probably for the next quarter working on iterative implementation of that new architecture. So there'll be lots more on this later, and I'll be able to speak more to the actual final user experience once we nail down which libraries we'll be using. Now, the next two things I want to highlight actually are related not to the static site editor, but as of 13.6, the static site editor group is taking stewardship of the global GitLab navigation and settings experience. So we're going to be dipping our toes into that part of the code base and working on a few issues that are really geared towards adding some consistency to that experience. So the first of which is a small annoyance potentially where as you are navigating around GitLab and you have recently visited projects and groups, that data is actually stored in local browser storage. So if I were to switch to another browser, open an incognito window, or even switch to another machine or a mobile device, this list could be very different. So what we're going to do pretty simply is take that data out of local browser storage and put it onto the user's database table, and then be able to populate this list consistently across devices. And on the topic of consistency, there's also a pattern on the left-hand navigation where if there are features here that you simply don't use, or you don't want to use, or are not potentially able to be configured for your project, you can turn them off in the settings. But that's not actually applicable to all items on the left-hand nav where that would be relevant. So we're going to be consistent. We're going to apply that pattern to the other features so that if there are features you don't use, you can simply turn them off. They don't need to be taking up space on your left-hand nav. We'll be digging in deeper to a lot of the existing research and the epics created for improving the UX of the navigation and the settings experience. So look for more on that in the coming milestones. That's all I wanted to highlight for today. As I mentioned, the full list is here in our planning issue. So please visit that and let me know if you have any questions in those issues. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you for the 13.7 kickoff.